the city hasn't built any large infrastructure for quite some time. So it will be something that will be noticed more than maybe if we were doing it on an ongoing basis. So that would be one for sure. And I think that when I'm not, you're outside of Edmonton, but if I grew up in Kamloops, I know that the housing starts, or say they go in waves in terms of the amount of housing that's being built. And right now, the amount of housing that's being built in Kamloops is noticeable.
Welcome to Municipal Affairs. Today we find ourselves in the stunning interior of British Columbia, exploring a city with deep roots in industry, a growing art scene, and a future defined by opportunities. The city of Kamloops. Nestled at the confluence of the North and South Thompson rivers, Kamloops is known for its breathtaking landscapes, vibrant community spirit, and status as the tournament capital of Canada. But like any other growing city in Canada, Kamloops faces challenges, from housing affordability to infrastructure demands. Joining me to co-host this show is Ian McCormack. Together, we sit down with Councillor Nancy Bepple of Kamloops, British Columbia, a dedicated voice on Kamloops City Council. We'll discuss the city's pressing issues, the bold steps that council is taking, and where she sees Kamloops heading as it moves into a second half of this council term. In the heart of every thriving community lies a well-crafted strategic plan. But crafting such a plan requires expertise, experience, and a deep understanding of local needs. Enter Strategic Steps, your partner in municipal strategic planning. Strategic Steps team of experts have years of experience in municipal administration. At Strategic Steps, they just don't develop plans. They co-create homegrown strategies tailored to your unique community. They listen, they collaborate, they empower your community to thrive. Contact Strategic Steps today and take the first step towards a brighter future for your municipality. Call Strategic Steps at 780-416-9255 or visit strategicsteps.ca to get started.
Great. Thank you for joining us here, Councillor. It's we'll certainly go by Nancy as we get a little bit more familiar with one another. We have a series of questions we've got for you, a little bit of going back and forth, and so I'll ask you some, and then Chris, of course, will opine too. I'm just interested in your take as a semi-long-term councillor about what you see as unique about how local government operates in BC that others across Canada may not be particularly aware of.
I have to say that I don't know that much about other local governments. I am on FCM committees, so that gives me a sense. But I think that what I find going forward is more and more we really have to liaise with the provincial government on a lot of issues. So the provincial government is driving legislation on, say, housing or use of illicit drugs, and we are having to pick up the pieces. So I think I would expect that would be somewhat the same across the country, but it's definitely more so, I would say, now than 12 or 15 years ago when I was on council to begin with.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Well, of course, BC has regional districts, and I don't think other parts of the country do. So there is a slightly different order of government in BC than others across the country might be familiar with.
Yeah, and in terms of the regional districts, I mean, depending on how they're operated, I think that they are a real plus. Kamloops, I think, is fairly unique in that the city of Kamloops, 100,000 people, makes up 2/3 of the population within the regional district. So we have a quite a bit of a financial contribution to the regional district, but we've benefited by having really good planning in the rural areas around the city. And so some regional districts like City of Greater Vancouver, they really are a whole bunch of metro centers. But in the case of the Thompson and Nickel Regional District, there's one large city, which is Kamloops, and some small villages and towns, and the rest is rural. So there's that balance between a very, very large partner and a whole bunch of small partners.
Thank you. One of the other things I've noticed about BC is it's not homogeneous, that whether it's the interior or the Northwest or the island or the lower mainland, BC is like 4 or 5 different places. I wonder if have you noticed anything like that as well in your experience?
Well, I think that what I've noticed is that it's very difficult for politicians and policymakers from the Lower Mainland to comprehend the situations outside of their region. And it would be a good example would be in terms of emergency response to wildfires and flooding. I've sat on some provincial panels, and there seems to be a disconnect between how people see the situation when they're sitting at the coast and, for the most part, not experiencing those events, or somewhere like Kamloops, where pretty well on a yearly basis we experience catastrophic events, not maybe within the city limits, but we are supporting the region around us.
I presume you're probably referring to things like fires and floods. What's Kamloops, and what's the impact been, and what sort of reaction has the city or the region managed to have to that to mitigate it in the future?
So the city of Kamloops, I guess one response is that we have the largest emergency support services volunteer cohort in the province. And we can get up to 40 or 50,000 evacuees that come to our city, and they need to be hosted in some way. Means that summer after summer after summer, we give up our recreational facilities to deal with the influx. But I know that our city does that very, very well. We haven't had any fires, well, except for very small fires. We haven't had catastrophic fires within city limits, but in every direction around the city, there's been fires. And then the floods from in the atmospheric river, what ended up happening there was we sent personnel from the city of Kamloops to the city of Merritt to help them keep their wastewater treatment plant running. So I think as a larger center, we take on a much larger share of responding to responses. Typically, the emergencies are happening outside of our boundaries, but we have the capacity.
Sure. I'd like to focus a little bit more narrowly now on the city. You're about halfway through, a little bit more than halfway through this council's term. I wouldn't mind if you could get your take on the state of the city, state of council in 2025, if you like. I mean, you were in the news a lot through the most of this term, and just see how council's handling all that attention. What you see in terms of resolution.
Yeah, it's been a challenge. I would say almost since day one, there's been a disconnect between the mayor and council, and that's not to say that council all agrees on every issue together, but we've been very, very consistent in terms of agreeing on what governance is. And so what has happened over the period of the council is that there's been a number of incidents where there's been conflict between the mayor and council. We now have a tool, I don't know outside of BC, but in BC we call it the Code of Conduct. And so we have instituted the code of conduct, and because of behavior from the mayor, and you might think that might resolve the issue, but actually it in general it hasn't really ended up with any change in behavior. So one of the more recent ones, the mayor received pictures of people who were on the streets engaging in using drugs, sex acts, and other behaviors. And then those photographs or images were forwarded to another party. And so that violates the freedom of the Privacy Act in terms of disseminating personal information without consent. We had a code of conduct. We've given some sanctions to the mayor. So you might think that would resolve the issue, but the mayor has completely denied responsibility, and so nothing in terms of behavior has been resolved. And there's been instance after instance after instance of disclosing of private information, employee information, bullying and harassment. And there's been code of conduct investigations, there's been findings, there's been sanctions, which a typical sanction would be some wages that have been taken away from the mayor. But there has not been any change that I can see in terms of the mayor's behavior overall. So whether the code of conduct is the right mechanism, that is what we have to use. That is our tool.
Councillor, can I jump in for a second and ask a follow-up on what you're saying? From an outsider's perspective, and Ian and I are both in Alberta, you're in BC, so we're seeing this from an outsider's perspective. We're seeing it from a municipal perspective because we're municipal observers and we like to listen to municipal things and we like to watch municipal things. Do the people of Kamloops tune into this stuff? Are the people of Kamloops actually tuning in and learning about what's going on at their city hall? Because we've had not similar, but somewhat similar issues happen here in Alberta. And I get a sense that there's that apathy that you and I've chatted about beforehand, that people just don't tune in because as long as my garbage is picked up and my water's turned on, who's my city councillor again? What's going on at City Hall? Do you get a sense that people of Kamloops are actually paying attention? Or is this just two municipal nerds here on a podcast talking about this issue with a councillor from the community?
I would say that there's different types of people. So there are some people that watch our council meetings every week. And even if a lot of the behaviors might happen outside of council, but if you simply watch the council meeting, you have a sense of where things are in terms of governance within the city. But that's a small number, right? Yesterday's council meeting, there was less than 100 people that were tuned in. There's the Facebook crowd, I guess. So it goes back and forth like ping pong balls of comments about how things are going. I would say that there are people that support the mayor and there's people that support the council. In the middle, there are many people that just see the entire council as being dysfunctional. It's it's challenging in terms of trying to follow good governance. If you listen to the mayor, he repeatedly brings up what's called the Henry Braun report. And Henry Braun was a mayor of Abbotsford. He was brought into the council as a special municipal advisor to give us ideas of how we could run better. And his report, if you have a chance to see it, is just like 101 basic local governance advice. There's nothing that's, I think, radical about what he says. It's very straightforward. Things like reading the agenda before the meetings, practicing good communication skills. So his report, all of council, I can't actually remember if the mayor accepted it when it was first presented, but the remainder of council accepted it. The mayor has adamantly rejected it since as something that was put in place to target him. And yet the report itself is simply a textbook on good governance, how to run a good meeting, how to make sure that decisions are made in a timely manner. So I think a lot of times people just see the entire council as not working well together, but there is a disconnect between the mayor and council.
I've worked across the country on it with municipalities, and I've developed a term I call the coffee shop senate. And it's those people who tend to gather together and talk about having common sense and just are generally critical of whatever the local government happens to be. Those type of people, and what you've said too now, perhaps about the relationship between council and the mayor, tends to have an impact on the effectiveness of governance in a municipality from a zero-sum perspective. And has there been an opportunity cost for this particular city council in terms of what you want to achieve by the end of this term, with this perhaps getting in the way?
I guess on the plus side, what council has done is focused on some very specific concrete goals. So one of which is build Kamloops, and that has allowed us to move forward on getting approval to build a new performing arts center and a new fourplex ice sheet. We've already built or refurbished and opened a new senior center. So that, I think, is a positive. We've had, and it's not just because of council, there's also the province who has dictated changes to our housing policies in terms of zoning. But we've made, I think, amazing headway in terms of approvals of housing projects, especially multifamily. So those are things where I see that we've made headway. Where it probably gets harder from my perspective is we had about 25 goals within our strategic plan, and we're not going to get to all of them, would be my perspective. Is we can't focus on so many different things when we don't have sort of leadership from the mayor. We definitely, I would think, have lost opportunities to build relationships with other levels of government. We do have a great relationship with our Minister of Housing, Ravi Kawan, and with Bowen Ma, the Minister of Emergency Services. But I don't think we've had the bandwidth to expand our advocacy work to more ministers. So I think what we've done well, but probably haven't done as many things as we might have done.
I had a look at your strategic plan, and there are certainly you put a series of 5 strategic priorities in there. And I mean, most places there would be no expectation that everything is going to get completed because of those internal factors, but the environment shifts as well. So there's something how do you choose your priorities from within that plan then? The ones that you are going to work on?
Well, I think that we picked things that everybody was on board for. and that there seemed to be a chance of success. So build Kamloops, I mean, it was a bit of a risk, and there is still people in the community that are opposed to the idea of going forward with Performing Arts Center and new ice sheets. But it's something, that type of project is very concrete. I think it's a good project to work on and to get some headway. Where I see that we haven't made as much headway as probably, say, with active transportation and the climate change initiatives. I think there's a reluctance from council as a whole to engage in actions that make measurable change.
So my final question for you before I turn it over to Chris is just about the end of the term. Do you have an impression about what you see the legacy of this particular city council will be when October of 2026 rolls around?
I guess that I think there would be three. So one would be build Kamloops.
Yeah.
More so because of COVID and other factors, the city hasn't built any large infrastructure for quite some time. So it will be something that will be noticed more than maybe if we were doing it on an ongoing basis. So that would be one for sure. And I think that when I'm not, you're outside of Edmonton, but if I grew up in Kamloops, I know that the housing starts they go in waves in terms of the amount of housing that's being built. And right now, the amount of housing that's being built in Kamloops is noticeable. And especially in the multifamily residential sector, and especially in the core of the city. And so I think that that's going to be a legacy simply because it's changing the shape of the city, of where it was primarily single family residential housing sort of spread out for miles in every direction. The city is starting to densify in the core. So that is something that people might not point to this council, but that will be there for decades to go ahead. I mean, it may be that I know that the province is looking at the whole legislation around code of conduct, and not just because of City of Kamloops, but probably we are one of the driving forces, is that the idea of the code of conduct that you say that these things are not acceptable behaviors and that there's consequences. That's all well and good, but if you can't actually change somebody's behavior. So there is a flaw in the current system in terms of code of conduct. I'm not sure quite how to address it, but what I would say is that we put in a code of conduct which was mirrored after another local governments, which was considered one of the gold standards. Putting in a code of conduct in and of itself does not solve problems of governance. It definitely gives a framework, but if people are not willing to adhere to the rules, it can be weak.
Thanks very much.
So I think that will be something that comes out of the province, but I mean, they're being driven by places like Kamloops to make changes.
Sure. Thanks. Thank you.
I want to jump in and I want to stick on the line of the province for a few seconds, if you don't mind, because you just had probably, and I say you as in the province of British Columbia, probably had one of the most contentious provincial elections that I have probably seen and covered in my time in covering politics, where you did not know the winner until almost a few weeks after the election was actually, all the ballots were cast. Now, since then, David Eby, the premier, has formed government. John Restad is the current leader of the official opposition, and the now leaderless Green Party is third party. Traditionally, the province looks from a political standpoint at areas that they do well in. So for the NDP under David Eby, that would be Lower Mainland BC. That'd be the Vancouver Island. That would be somewhat of your area, but not Kamloops. Kamloops is strongly a conservative bastion, as it's shown in the last provincial election, with both seats in Kamloops going for conservative. Do you get a sense that Victoria understands the issues that are going on in Kamloops and outside of that Lower Mainland area?
I'm going to stick to the things that we've talked about, but I think that the province appreciates that Kamloops is willing to work with them. So as very specific example, Kamloops just approved and it has just opened a new 44-bed shelter. And we have also repeatedly opened housing, which is called supportive housing, which has many different flavors, actually. And we're continuing to work with the province through BC Housing primarily on finding solutions for unhoused individuals. So when I look at the mayor of Vancouver saying they will no longer open supportive housing in Vancouver, that's a stark difference from what the city of Kamloops has done. And I mean, you just have to watch how things go in terms of when you try to open up a shelter in a neighborhood, and the pushback from the local residents that will often make that fail. That the city of Kamloops has, I mean, credit goes to our staff for having strong relationships with the different service agencies that deliver the services, for City of Kamloops, for relationships with the local business associations. But at the end of the day, I think that Ravi Kahlon, Minister of Housing, comes to Kamloops and makes announcements about housing because we are willing to work with him and we're not putting up roadblocks. So I think.
How can the province help you more? Because the one thing I hear from municipal leaders, and as yourself a municipal leader, you must have a grocery list of things that the province can do a little bit better on or help you out a little bit more on. Where would you like to see the province step in and help the city of Kamloops out a little bit more to address some of the challenges that you're facing?
I guess that one of the things that is always a frustration in Alberta has Alberta Health Services, so I don't know how that works with local municipalities, but it's like this triangle where nothing is ever resolved. So we want a sobering center in Kamloops for people who are under the influence of drugs or alcohol instead of going to city cells. We go to Interior Health, they pass it to Ministry of Health, it comes back to Kamloops. It's been going around in circles for years and years and years. So I think that the province does have some weight in terms of Interior Health. and to be passing the buck and saying, well, it's not our responsibility, it's Interior Health, they have to decide. I think that is something that is very, very frustrating. Another thing is, in terms of the province, is that the province could go to bat for local governments in terms of policing. So our police costs now are 25% of our budget. The cost for each individual RCMP member is between $750 and $1 million when you count in their equipment, their benefits, their support staff, the building, everything else. It gets to be quite expensive. And that's being driven by the federal government. The province, because the federal government negotiates with the RCMP. The province could be our advocate, because this is something that is hammering local governments across the province. BC, more than any other jurisdiction, uses the RCMP as a contract police organization. Outside of some very, the Lower Mainland, those municipalities typically have their own policing, but the rest of the province is RCMP. So it's gonna hit us when the Surrey RCMP closes down, because there's a whole cost structure that was based on the Surrey detachment, which was the largest detachment in the province. And now that's going to disappear. So then some of those costs that were borne across the whole province, Surrey's no longer going to pay for part of that. So where is that going to go? It's going to go to the rest of the province, perhaps. So I would say that would be something that is a major budget. The province could be our advocate for with the federal government.
I want to turn to the economy for a few moments, and then I'm going to throw it over to Ian to wrap up. We are recording this the last week of January 2025. Now, we have someone down south of our border whose name is President Donald Trump, who is about to introduce, or is going to, or potentially has introduced, a 25% tariff on all goods coming in from Canada, going from Canada into the United States. Now, I know municipalities don't play a role on the global stage, but they do have an impact on the global stage of what is made in their own local communities. Has your council begin discussions, or has there been discussions about how the impacts of the global economy could impact the economy of Kamloops in 2025, or are you taking a wait and see approach?
Yeah, around the council chamber, there hasn't been a discussion. I think that Kamloops will feel the ripples, but maybe not the tsunami. I mean, we've already been impacted, not by Trump, but we have a large university, and the immigration policy that's been changed has impacted the number of international students coming to Kamloops. So we're, I think, aware that we are not an isolated island, that changes outside of the city boundaries impact our economy. I think that we have to remember we're a railway town. We have the two major railways that go through Kamloops. There's about 1,000 people that work for those railways, and if they're not as busy because they're not taking goods to and from the Vancouver port or for wherever they're going east, we're going to be impacted. Those railways won't have as much work. We have forestry, we've got mining, we've got tourism. So, but I think at this point, we're just waiting to see where the dust settles, rather than reacting without really knowing what is going to be happening.
What's your vision for Kamloops by the end of 2025 then? Because we every municipality has its challenges and every municipality has its unique share of challenges. Do you get a sense that Kamloops is going to be stronger, or are we going to be, if we invited you back on in January 2026 and had this exact same conversation, would you be talking about the exact same issues? Where do you see Kamloops at the end of this year?
So I would say that the strength of Kamloops is its good planning and good infrastructure. So things that were built when I was a kid are still benefiting the community today. I'm really hoping we've approved a huge number of housing units. I'm hoping that those builders have the confidence to complete the plans that they went through with. That would be something that would benefit our community for years ahead. In terms of the Build Kamloops, there's been these ongoing court challenges by people that dispute our right to make decisions in terms of those projects. I hope that the projects get through all of the court challenges and that we can make some headway. Because again, I look at projects that were built 50 years ago, they still benefit the community today. Those sorts of things, housing and infrastructure, sort of make it easier for everybody else to do what they do. And that's what I would hope, is that we make some headway in both of those.
What about yourself? As a counselor, how do you want to grow this year? What do you want to be able to achieve by the end of 2025? And I'm putting you on the spot because we're supposed to be talking about Kamloops, but you are an integral part of the city of Kamloops. You are a decision maker around that council table. You have one vote on that council. What do you hope to be in 2025 by the end of this? So that way, if I came back and said, Nancy, did you achieve your personal goal as a counselor?
So what I would say is, I mean, there is the ongoing, I don't know if you want to call it chaos or fraction of the issues between the mayor and council are ongoing. And I am not hopeful that that will improve. I haven't seen any change in the behavior of the mayor and council. We've been fairly consistent in terms of following the basics of good governance. What I am trying to do is just reach out more and more into community and make those connections with the community groups. City council sets policy, but whether it's business or not-for-profits or individuals, they're the ones that drive the community. And so really building those relationships up, finding out what their concerns are, being able to sort of share ideas with council based on those ideas, maybe being a little more proactive. We've got we have a continual flow of emails, people sending us things that they want, but I think it's important to be proactive and go out and connect with specific groups within the community to hear what their concerns are.
I'd just close by saying cities, communities, councils are all about people and relationships, and it's those relationships that either help or hinder the headway you just recently talked about. Councillor Nancy Bepple, thank you so much for joining Chris Brown and myself to tell us the story of Kamloops from your perspective. Thank you very much for joining us.
Well, nice to meet you, Ian. And Chris, always a pleasure.
Ian, thank you so much for joining us on the Municipal Affairs today. It's always great to have you on as co-host, and it's always great to speak to municipal leaders from across this country. How'd you feel like the interview went today?
Yeah, thanks. It's always fun to co-host with you, of course. I have a lot of empathy for people who are thrust into situations similar to the one the councillor mentioned, but are really not of their own making. Because I suspect that most people go into a council term with a full anticipation of being able to get a lot accomplished. And when you have sand in the gears, like what we've seen happen in Kamloops, it certainly can slow down the progress. Although councillor was also quite clear that she thinks they've made significant progress in some areas. So good for them.
For those who want more of Ian and Chris, head over to the Political Trenches Local Government at Work, where we host a bi-monthly show where we talk to twice a month, the show where we talk to municipal leaders. So that's where you can continue to hear Ian and I talk to municipal leaders and municipal stakeholders from across Canada. But we also want to thank you for tuning in for another episode of Municipal Affairs. We hope you've enjoyed the conversation and gained some valuable insights. To stay in the loop with all of our latest episodes, don't forget to subscribe to the show on your favorite platforms or follow us on YouTube at Cross Border Network. For even more content and learn more about the stories and the people that we feature on the show, visit crossborderinterviews.ca. Your support means the world to us. So share this episode with your friends, your family, and even your community to help keep the conversation going. Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and we'll be back with a brand new episode of Municipal Affairs. Till then, talk soon.